over here. Anyone else that comes in, let them have a copy of the Widrick genogram. Welcome to our 2023 Z-Fest. And we had decided that, I think it was 2 years ago, that you see in the Z Garden that there's a name on each one of the stones having to do with the families that would have come over from Europe, immigrated. And so we started out first with the Zier name, and then we started with Mosier the next year, and now this year we're doing Widrick. And you take out your genogram. The first page, you will see there are different versions of spellings, and of course I think the CK is probably more the Americanized. It's probably more like the Vitrich, but not sure. And I think in German, is it the W a V? I think.
Widrick.
Widrick?
Yeah, that's what we were told originally.
You're right. You're right. I wrote that down someplace. It's a U with 2 dots over it, and TT
E-R-I-C-H.
E-R-I-C-H. Widrick. Widrick, they say it? Okay, I guess that is the old one. Yes, I remember you saying. Okay, and it starts with Pierre and Marie. And they are the family that came over with 5 children from ages 2 to 10. Young children. And as far as we know, they all made it. I don't know how long they were sailing. I sit there and I wonder, how many times the kids were saying, "Are we almost there?"
Yeah.
And then I thought, how difficult for the parents. There's not one blooming landmark, and probably forget the map. So they didn't know either where they were. Come on in and help yourself to a genogram here. So it's Pierre, Peter, and Marie. And then on the other side goes to John and Anna. And this is where the division comes that our panelists are represented by. The different boys and the children of John and Anna. And then your next sheets are John Widrick was going to be a part of our group today, is not feeling well, will not be here. But I'll try to insert some things that I had learned from him. So it's John Widrick, LeEtta Widrick, and Loren. They're going to be our panelists today. And we'll try to leave some time at the end if you have questions. So Loren, I think probably most of you know Loren. Marilyn, his wife. They're 60 plus years married, have 5 children?
Yes.
Okay. Living currently in Adams. He's retired pastor. How many years?
How many years retired or how many years as pastor? I think 38.
With pastoring?
Yeah,
Wow.
I think so. I started a little late.
I know.
I had to get straightened up, right, Lois?
And pastors don't really get to retire.
I know.
Really.
That's what they tell me.
You know how it is?
But I'm practicing it.
He's practicing it.
That's right.
Yes, and his parents are Aaron and Sarah Widrick, and Sarah was Schwarzentrugger. And then we have LeEtta, married Norman, and she didn't have to change her last name.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was on.
Oh, you were a Lyndaker. Yep, you're right. And her parents were Elvin Lyndaker and Lena Widrick Lyndaker. And she had 3 children, and distance-wise, they go from about a quarter of a mile to the state of Washington. So she's been busy doing some flying over the years. And I say, I'm going to tell on her, she is 90. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I said, come on. So, yes, and you hide your age very well.
Use a lot of makeup.
There we go. Well, I have to remember that's the key. Okay. Every name that we've had, there's always a little history that goes back. And they came over from the port of Havre, France, and hailed kind of Lorraine, France. But there's a story long before that, and Loren's going to catch us up on that one, and also some powerful characters he's going to tell us about. It's yours.
Okay. When I checked with Mom and Dad years ago, where they thought that our ancestors came from, they said Alsace-Lorraine, and they were correct in that. But let me go back a ways. I don't know if any of you remember Eddie Widrick. Yeah. After he retired, he went to Switzerland and Alsace-Lorraine to check up on the background of the Widricks. And he went to Alsace-Lorraine. I think he started there. They sent him to Switzerland, and a little place called the Emmental Valley in Switzerland. So he stayed there for quite some time with people whose parents had passed down to them information about the Widricks. So the story that he came back with, and I knew Eddie pretty well. Ed didn't make things up. I mean, he didn't. What happened was this: the original Widrick that the people in the Emmental Valley remembered was a farmer, lived up in the mountains. He'd come into the Emmental Valley, the stores there, 2 or 3 times a year. He had a pet donkey. Sometimes he'd bring in produce that he grew on the farm and exchange it for food. Sometimes he just brought the stuff in, and the donkey would go back empty. He didn't need supplies. So the story started. Oh, the other thing was this. As you know, my mother's name was Schwarzentruber. And he found out that the Widrick farm and the Schwarzentruber farm up in the mountains were next to each other. I'll tell you one thing, I don't believe in coincidences. I've come over, as I read the Bible and things like that, there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything is allowed or caused by God for a reason. But I thought that was just interesting. Mom and Dad didn't know that because they died before I heard from Eddie. Not that it matters. But anyways, the story of the original Widrick, as far as the people in the Emmental Valley said, he was a husky, strong man. My grandpa Widrick was the same way, big, powerful man.
Vitrich actually means glutton, like the literal translation of Vitrich, like with the W, is glutton. So it makes sense that they were big hulking.
Yeah. But
Lived
yeah,
up to their
and you
name.
see, it didn't work for me. It's not that I'm not a glutton, though. Chocolate cake. Yeah. But anyways, so the story, and I don't know if this is true, but the reputation that this man had about the Widricks was when he would go back with the donkey empty, they had to cross a stream. And this I don't know if it's true or not. Eddie brought it back. He said that was the story in the village, the Emmental Valley, that the Widricks were guys that carried their donkeys across the stream. So that's the most important thing about us Widricks. I never did that. I couldn't anyways. But that's that part of it. Now, how they ended up in Alsace-Lorraine was that after the Reformation, Switzerland, the authorities in Switzerland, after a while, did not want people who were in the Reformation believers. Because of that, they didn't want them in their country anymore. So they had to go to Alsace-Lorraine. That's the story that Ed gathered from the people in the Emmental Valley. So that's where the Alsace-Lorraine came in, and what happened after that, how, I don't know the rest of the story. Ed didn't say, but he said they didn't originate in the Alsace-Lorraine, they originated.
Were they Mennonite? Were they Anabaptist?
Yes, and that's what happened in the Reformation. Yeah, and they were, as far as I know they were. I know in my background it's all Mennonite. Yeah.
And I don't believe they ever owned property in Alsace.
I don't know
They
because
just worked for.
Yeah, it was,
I think you're probably right.
yeah, that wasn't really a
That's what
nation
I
in it.
learned when
Yeah.
we were there.
It's not even a nation in itself, really. They just
No,
were
the
there.
Jack Ransom have turned.
Yeah.
It's that part that keeps going back and forth.
Yes, that's right. Who's owning it
So are
now?
the German,
Yeah, who's owning it now? So that's the early part of that I wanted to share with you. Now, do you want me to continue or turn it over to her for a time? Or which would you want next?
We'll turn over to LeEtta
Good.
once.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, LeEtta, if you want to talk about, I think you have some happenings on the Wagner Road there.
Yeah, only I'm not as memorized as him. I'll have to read mine.
That's all
Perfectly
right, we'll
okay.
listen.
Joseph Widrick Sr. was the seventh child of the John Widrick and Anna Nafziger family. John Widrick was born in 1834 and died in 1906. Grandpa was born into a family of 11 children. The family homestead was the Joseph and Helena Nafziger Steery Farm, which is Ernie Steery's. And through Strangers and Pilgrims, I see that he was a great-grandson of John Widrick. That's where the Steery came in for that.
Okay, and then the interesting thing is that you go out this road and get out to the Four Corners.
Yeah.
They are the first farm right on the left.
On the left, going back to Krogan.
And,
Right.
and that was
Yes,
more that
that's-
original.
I always thought it was
Widrick?
Grandma Fanny's here, but it was not. You know,
Okay.
so. Yes, so anyway, then Joseph Widrick Sr., my grandfather, was married to Catherine Yowsey, who were my grandparents, and of course Loren's also, Marilyn's also. And they farmed on the Wagner Road, and they raised a family of 10 children. And my mother was the sixth child, born the 13th of July, 1907. And the part of that, and I don't have it, Rosemary had it, and when the children settled the house, I don't know what happened, but Grandpa Widrick had an almanac every year, and when they had a new baby, he would outline that date, and then he gave the almanac to the child when they got married. Mom had hers, didn't have Laura. In 1912, Grandma and Grandpa built a new house on the farm, and of course at that time they built a house to accommodate for church in the houses. So it was a big living room with a big section, and there was a joke about that, because when they built the new house, the old house, they pulled out on the road and they put a lantern on each end, so if a horse and buggy would come through in the middle of the night, they would see that house. And Mom always said she slept in the house, she slept on the road one night in the house. And that old house got put over on the other side of the road then, and I think Uncle Urban and them used to have chickens and pigs and whatever else in it, you know, and I didn't know about the lights until I talked with Edsel. Edsel calls me about every month, and we would discuss all these things, and he said, oh yeah, he said they put a light on both ends of the house so that if somebody came through, they would see the house. So I don't think they do that today. So, yeah. So anyway, and Mom said that Grandpa Widrick worked away in the winter to support the family, and of course then the children had responsibilities. The boys had to take the cows out to water. They didn't have water supply in the barn, so they had to take them down to water them, and of course they all had their duties to do, and Mom always said that they had to mop the kitchen floor every day. Everybody had a turn in mopping the floor before they went to school. And then the education part of it, they went to the 8th grade, and if they passed a test, they were done. But if they didn't pass a test like we do with Regents today, they would have to continue till they did, you know. And
So you know that Regents, I remember when we were in high school, people would say, will ever go away? And I remember Esther Mattis across from us, she said, it will never go away. It's always been a part of New York State. Yeah. So, yeah, it was.
And
way
of course, they
back.
didn't further their education, but I know my mother always wanted to be a teacher, and I know Aunt Catherine always wanted to be a teacher, and the rest of the girls, I don't know what they, you know, if they would have had any profession that they wanted or not. But you had to quit school and work, you know, so. And so then Mom always said that Grandma's motto was that cleanliness was as important as godliness. And she always made sure that her house was in order, and I can imagine with 10 children.
But you know what's
And boys especially.
Hey,
Uncle Joe was
hey,
Uncle Joe was, they always talked about Uncle Joe, did Aunt Laura. Well, he was always picking on his sisters. So, no. Yeah. So, yeah, so. And we used to always butcher together. Grandpa was good at butchering, and he always helped butcher. And then after he couldn't do it anymore, Uncle Irvin and Aunt Sevilla, we always butchered together. That was a special day, and I thought it was a big deal. And I would stay out of school and butchered that day. But when I got older, I didn't think it was so funny. So, yeah. And I remember after Grandma and Grandpa moved over, and they built a piece on the farmhouse, and then Grandma and Grandpa lived in that. And I remember when they moved over, they had come up with a new invention where they changed the burners on a cook stove, and you would use kerosene. It was like your oil burners today, gas stoves. And they were bragging them up. Oh, it was wonderful. And I know Grandma Fanny Widrick had one. You could sit on the top of it and you wouldn't even burn your seat. But they thought it was a quite invention. But I don't think it ever went very far because I never, so anyway, yeah.
forget the 2-minute egg.
Yeah. But it was yes, it was a good invention for senior people because then they didn't have to handle wood and ashes and,
Yep.
And Grandpa Woodrick passed away right after their 50th wedding anniversary. Their wedding anniversary was in January, and he passed away in December, and Grandma still lived in the other part. And when they moved in the other part, they took half of Uncle Irvin's living room and then built a piece on, and Uncle Irvin's furnace would heat their part. They never had a phone. If they needed a phone, they used Uncle Irvin's. It was family, so, yeah, so.
Loren, you had a similar situation with your grandparents.
Yes. My grandpa and grandma Widrick lived in our house. It was kind of they'd made it into a 2-family house.
Like a dotty house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, doors in between. And they had lived in there a long time before I was born. My dad went to work for his brother when his brother bought the farm. And a year into, Dad was only like 18 or 19 when he went to work for his brother. Can't think of his name now. And about a year into that situation, his brother bought a horse in Watson and was leading it behind the car to bring it up to the farm, and the horse got balky. You know what that means? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he would go back and try to get it to follow the car. He was hooked to it. He went behind the horse and touched him on the hip, and the horse kicked him in the stomach, and it didn't kill him immediately. He lived a few days. So his wife didn't obviously want the farm because I don't know if they had children then yet or not. Wouldn't know. So she asked Dad if he would buy it. I think he was 21 at the time, and he said, "Yeah, I will." He wanted to be a farmer, so he bought the farm. He wasn't married yet, so Grandpa and Grandma, my Grandpa and Grandma Widrick, who owned the farm on the number 3 road, sold it to my Uncle John and moved in to Grandma to cook for meals for Dad, and Uncle John to help, or my Grandpa John to help on the farm. You'll find there's a lot of comedy in our family. I mean, humor, good humor. Mom said that Dad didn't really like her, but he needed to cook. And she wasn't offended at all. She just said, "I figured it out." So that's that part of it. Yeah, so by the time I can remember, I'm probably 3 or 4 years of age, and they were living over there. So I spent a lot of time over there with Grandpa and Grandma. My Grandma Widrick I loved to be read to. I always loved to be read to. Started really young, before I could read, far before that. So I'd take my little books over and she'd read to me. And but Grandpa Widrick wouldn't read to me. And I wondered why, he never did. So I asked my dad. He said, Grandpa Widrick can't read English. But he was a great friend. We used to play hide and seek. He'd sit in a chair. He'd say, you go hide now, and you tell me when I'm supposed to start looking. He couldn't get out of his chair. So he'd sit in the chair, and I'd say, I'm ready. And he'd guess all kinds of places. I'm never catching on. He knows exactly where I am. I'm still slow. Catching on. Want me to go on with some more stuff, or what?
Yeah,
Where?
that's
Okay.
Can I ask what your uncle's name was? Your dad's brother who was killed. What was
I can't think of it now. I'm sorry. What?
Ezra.
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 Yeah.
Never heard that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
grandfather's name.
Well, he
Yep.
was married,
What?
wasn't he? He was married.
He was married. Yeah, and I can't.
He
I-
married Yulie Kiefer's mother first. She was married to him first.
Yeah, I don't remember her name. But,
Jake Lane.
Ada.
Jake and Ada, yes.
okay.
Is that right?
So yeah, my name's Loren John. I want to tell you how things have changed. And I didn't. Well, I thought Loren was a strange name. Back in those days, you didn't hear it much. John was normal. My grandpa's name was John. So I asked my mom and dad. I don't know how old I was. Why did you name me Loren John? Back then, there were the mailmen were men because of driving in snow and all that. So there were 3 of them in our general area that were mailmen. And common practice in our home, the mailman, when he came to deliver mail, would come in for breakfast. He'd stay for breakfast and then he'd go. So, and then, I don't know if you folks probably don't know that, my dad broke his back in 1942, hauling ice they used to haul ice in the winter, got it out of New Bremen in the pond, and he was loading ice on the truck, and of course it was cold, and his truck was slippery, he fell on a piece of ice and broke his back. And back then they did new back surgery, so about a year after that he was in a hospital bed and paralyzed. So we used to make maple syrup, and of course once Dad got in that situation he couldn't, so these 3 mailmen ran the sugar bush for him and he finally had back surgery. I probably won't take time to do that. It was successful. Quite a story though.
Yeah.
Mailman.
But they did that, and again, Loren John was the name of the. John Loren was the name of the mailman.
Oh, yeah.
And Dad said, now my older brother was named Aaron after my dad, but they said they wanted to name me in honor of the mailman.
No.
Now, if you did that today, you'd be suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's that part. A few things. She'd asked me about things that influenced my life as a little growing up. We used to visit Jake and Anna Yowzy a lot, and I don't know if anybody remembers Molly. She was in bed as long as I knew. I don't know what she had. Probably she couldn't talk, so some sort of palsy or something. She lived there, so we visited there a lot, especially Sunday afternoons. And there was a placard on their wall. I can read now. I'm probably 21. No. Probably 6 or 7. I'd learned to read. And on the wall, it said, don't do anything you don't want to be doing when Jesus returns. Don't say anything you don't want to be saying when Jesus returns. And don't go anywhere that you don't want to be found when Jesus returns. And being that I don't know when he's returning, I've tried to follow that. I haven't always been, I've broken that rule sometimes, but boy, that impressed me as a kid. It really did. I never forgot that. Let's see. Oh, some one-liners from my dad. I learned a lot from my dad. I went through my later teen years and didn't follow him. I wish I would have. One of them is, he says, keep your own porch clean. And I asked him, what do you mean by that? He said, if you get too concerned about the filth or stuff on your neighbor's porch, your porch will get so dirty you can't see your neighbor. Clean your own porch. It struck me. Another thing, he'd say, if it's worth doing it, do it well. I haven't always followed that, but I know that works well. You know, if it's worth doing, do it well. If it's not worth doing, don't do it at all. Waste your time. I went to town one day riding with Dad. We lived 3 miles out of Lowville. And I'm now probably just preteen. And I like speed, you know. We're driving to Lowville and this car passes us. I said, Dad, why'd you let that car pass you? He never said a word. We got down to the stoplight. The car's right in front of us. He said, that's why. People should think of that today. About passing, you know. Road manners are totally gone, it seems. Yeah. And sometimes I've broke those rules too. A person I met, okay, my I had open heart surgery back in 2005. I went into the hospital on a Wednesday, and my surgery was scheduled for the next Monday at St. Joe's. My heart surgeon came in on a Friday night to meet with me the first time. It's about 5 o'clock at night. He comes in his scrubs. He is soaking wet, top and bottom. First thing he needs to apologize. He said, sorry I didn't come to talk with you sooner. And I said, looks like you've been working today. He said, yeah, I did 3 open heart surgeries today. That was in 2005. That's why he was all sweaty. Then he said to me, Loren, I've got a brother. Boy, this impacted me. It gave me a lot of peace, too. And if I was operating on him, I'd do my very best. And he said, I promise you that's what I will do. But he said the outcome is still in God's hands. I like surgeons like that. I like surgeons like that. It puts the, I've learned a long time ago I can't control my life. I can try to behave, but I'm not in control. Floyd Phone, this is a guy that joined our church late in life. He's a veteran from World War II. He didn't land at the landing in
Normandy.
Normandy. He wasn't there, but he came shortly afterwards, and he went all the way to the gates of Berlin. 2 incidents in his life. He survived the Battle of the Bulge by burying himself in the snow. German soldiers walked right through and didn't see him. Probably a little help from the Lord. And he wasn't a believer then. He did, but his mother sent him. He gave me a little New Testament. It's about that big, about that wide. Written in it. Traveled with me all the way from Normandy to Berlin. But he didn't believe the Bible. But his mother sent it with him.
You should talk a little louder.
It's on. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, because there's people out here that can't hear you quite so loud.
Okay. His other event was they were on their way. Now, the war, as far as the only one that didn't know the war was over was Hitler at this time. I mean, he just wouldn't give up. But they were in German territory, heading into just taking over Germany. And his unit had about 100 people in. But the death rate had been so high that there was only about 15 left of the original group. And the guy that was the first man in charge of that group had gotten killed. So it was a brand new guy that had never fought before. So they're coming through here, and they come into a place, if you look at a plate or a soup bowl turned towards you. You go down into a little place like this and you crawl out the other side. And they're just going in there, and all of a sudden, when they get down inside to that, along the edge of the bowl and ahead of them, the German soldiers pop up. Guns and everything. And they had an interpreter, and they said, you have a choice. You can surrender or get shot. And the young sergeant that was in control had not faced any action yet. So he said to Floyd, because Floyd was a veteran, he didn't have any, he was just a regular. He said, Floyd, what are we going to do? Floyd said, I looked at him and said, in my experience, we've freed some German prison camps. He said, I'd rather die than surrender, because I don't want to there. So he said, I'm going through, you guys do whatever you want. He headed up the hill. All at once the Germans disappeared. He looked behind me and the whole group was following him.
Really?
So fast forward, he's home, he's an unbeliever, and Adeline Connecto was a widow. And he was a divorcee. They were going to get married, they never did because he got sick. But he came to church, she invited him to church. She came to me after several weeks and she said, Loren, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. She says, I don't know if he's interested in church or just me. You know, and she wasn't interested at that time. They did plan a marriage, it never happened. But the story behind that is, Floyd got saved in church. He responded to an altar call and accepted the Lord. So he became a dear friend of mine, partly because of his background. So I used to get discouraged. Pastors do get discouraged, at least this one does sometimes. So when I was really discouraged, I would go down to his place. He had a little trailer. We'd sit on the porch on a recliner. And the way I remember it, we'd just sit there, wouldn't say anything for a while. And then he put his hand on my knee. He said, Loren, just don't ever quit. And with his story of what he did in the Army, you better believe that, Loren. This man's been through it. He knows what it means not to quit. He was ready to die rather than quit. So I thought that was God using him to encourage me. He never lectured me. He would just say, Loren, don't ever quit. Fits a situation when I was ordained. A pastor friend of mine said to me, he said, before you get ordained, Loren, there's one thing I need to tell you. He said, you need to be sure before you're ordained. It's not enough for the organization that wanted me to take the position or the church that agreed to it. He said, you need to know that God called you. Having a church pick you or a committee doing the best they can is not going to be enough. I said, why? He said, Loren, I can guarantee you sometime not too long in your ministry you're going to be thinking you should quit because it's not going well. It's talked about, what is said in the pastoral lingo is the honeymoon's over. Yeah, your honeymoon's over. That means, the early years are usually pretty good. Then comes the hard stuff. So I stayed in my memory kind of, but I didn't think much about it. About, 8 years, 10 years, I'm out in the woods cutting wood. Hot summer day. I love to cut wood. I'm really discouraged with the church. And even wood cutting wasn't going well. And the Lord reminded me what that pastor said. He said, I called you, and really, you shouldn't, disagree with the call. And that's why I stayed. Want some more or not? Or you want her?
You know what? I want you to ask the blessing for the noon meal.
Okay.
And we will continue, 2:30?
Yeah, you just do 30 to
We'll be
315.
repeating some of it in the beginning.
I'd like to add one thing.
Okay, go
Oh.
ahead.
Grandpa Widrick always read German. They never had a newspaper in their home, and Mom always said that when nighttime came, he would get his Bible out by the lamp and the kerosene lamps, and he would read his Bible. The only magazine they ever got was the Herald Warheit. Do you remember? Does anybody remember that? All in German.
I don't know.
Until it quit being published, I think Grandma always got it. I would look at it, but of course, didn't mean much to me.
My grandpa Nafziger wrote in that.
Did he?
Yeah.
The only time my parents talked German is when Grandma and Grandpa would come and they didn't want us to know what they were talking about, so they would talk in German. So, and I feel bad that we never kept it up.
In my home, the only time my parents talked in German was Christmas time. Same reason.
Yes, yes.
Okay, shall I pray? Father, we thank you for your goodness to us. Thank you, Lord, for supplying all of our needs. Thank you, Lord, that your care for us is beyond our imagination. Help us, Lord, to obey you. Help us to be thankful, Lord. Lord, sometimes things come into life that are hard. But the Bible says, Lord, that you turn things like that into good if we're patient. Now pray a blessing on the meal, Lord. Thank you for everyone that's on the grounds. Thank you for the people that have worked so hard, Lord, to make this place what it is. We thank you for the food. We ask you, Lord, to bless it to our bodies, that we may be physically healthy. And Lord, always remember that spiritual food that we get from you is even more valuable than natural food. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.
You have your little circles and squares. This is just kind of a visual of the Widrick genealogy. And I forgot to put on here, actually, the name that it's called Vitrich, I think it is.
Widrick, I think.
Widrick?
It's something like that.
Udrich.
And they actually,
U
and then
dot
the U is a D sound.
That's called
And
lots.
they
The
said
U
they
and the
really
dots
think
are
this
two
is the
lots.
old, it's got the little dots
Widrick.
over indicating
Widrick.
for different pronunciation, but they think that's actually the older, which, more the original. And on your first page here, it's a Peter and Marie, and they're, let me think, 5 children, aged from 10 down to 2, were the first Widrick family to come. Came out of Havre, the Port Havre, in France. And that's where the Mosers and Zers, I think most of the immigrants that came from that port. Lord's gonna tell us a little bit more about the Widrick genealogy back in Europe. So this is the first family that arrived here, coming in 1838. And as far as we know, the children, even though young, made the trip. And then the next 3 sheets, John Widrick is not with us today. He was at the emergency room yesterday, so I told him to take vacation and recuperate. If we have time, I'll share some things that he had shared. And so it's the John Widrick family, LeEtta's family, and Loren's. And they're going to be our panelists today. They all come from this same Peter and Marie. The only change would be when you get to John and Anna and their children. Then they stem from 3 different sons of John and Anna's. And then it takes then John and Anna and then the son and then, down to where they are. Okay. Do you people know these panelists? Maybe not. Okay, I'll give a little history. Loren Widrick is from Adams area. He's retired pastor of Grace Fellowship. Was pastor for about 38 years, and his son is now pastor, so he's maybe still kind of semi-involved. From what I know of pastors, you never get done. It's kind of like being a mother. I don't think they ever get done either. I had one of my profs from my master's at SU saying, she says, yep, she says, I'm always my own person until I go home to my mother's. she said, then the rules with the kids completely are gone. And she says, I'm replaced. That's it. I just had to laugh. Loren is fifth generation, counting from Peter and Marie, and so is LeEtta. And John would have been sixth generation. Loren has been married 60 plus years, and you were married 50 plus.
64.
64, were you? Oh, I didn't do my math right. Oh my goodness. Okay. And Loren in Maryland, his wife, parents of 5 children and parent of 3. And her children go from a quarter mile from her house to the state of Washington. So she's been flying and seeing them. So, okay, I think we will just quick go on and you tell us more about where this family really came from. They really didn't come from France. And they were German speaking, but they came from somewhere else. And he's also going to tell us about a main character that has a unique one.
Yeah, okay. What I'm going to be sharing came from a fellow by the name of Ed Widrick. He was adopted by Ernie Widrick and Mildred. But when he retired, he decided to go into Europe to trace down genealogy. And he went to Alsace-Lorraine first because that's where the common idea was, is where our ancestors came from. But when he got there and started questioning, they said, well, actually, they weren't born in Alsace-Lorraine, they were born in Switzerland. And Eddie asked where, if they knew where, and they said, yeah, in a place called the Emmental Valley in Switzerland. So he went there and I think he spent a month there. With people, obviously, that would not have remembered the original Widricks, but the information had been passed down through the years. So the first Widrick it wasn't called Widrick, it was that Widrick, I guess. And I'll tell you the definition of that after I tell you the story. But this man I forget his name, his first name, I don't remember. Not good at names. He lived up in the mountains and had a little farm. I don't remember anything about it. Eddie, I don't think Ed said anything about his wife. He must have been married or there wouldn't have been any carry on, but I don't remember that. But anyways, about 3 times a year he'd come down from the mountains to bring some produce into the town and trade it for food that he couldn't grow or things he needed. And he had a pet donkey. So the donkey, they come down with him loaded down with stuff. Sometimes the donkey was loaded on the way back, taking back the supplies, but sometimes he didn't have to take any back. And the story is, whether this is true, I can't tell you, but the story was from the town that on the way back, they had to cross a stream. And if the donkey wasn't carrying any weight, he carried the donkey across the stream. So we're known as the Widricks that carry their donkeys across the street. That's our fame. The Widricks that I knew through my lifetime were big men, powerful, probably 6 foot, 6'1", close to 200 pounds, and all muscle. Can I tell a story about my grandpa? Grandpa Widrick, that would be John. I grew up my mom and dad's home was double home, and Grandpa and Grandma Widrick lived there for several years while I was growing up. But after they died, my dad told me the story. And my grandpa was a big, powerful man, even in old age, broad-shouldered, not fat, but just muscly. So back then, of course, in the Mennonite church, you weren't supposed to go to the fair or anything like that. So my grandpa was a really good wrestler, and he developed that going to picnics and reunions. Guys would get together and wrestle, and the point came with no one to wrestle him because there was no competition. So he heard about, they didn't call them fairs, they had another word for that back then, I can't remember, but it's like a fair in places outside of Lewis County, because if he did it in Lewis County, the church had been after him. They weren't supposed to do that. So he'd go out of the county. What they would do in these fairs, they would bring in a professional wrestler, the fair board would, and then they would invite local guys to wrestle him, and they got paid for wrestling him. And of course, the professional wrestler, would supposedly win all the matches. Now, I'm not sure, but the hint out there was betting on that. Odds. You could bet against a professional, but you used odds. So what happened was my grandpa started beating the professionals. And eventually they wouldn't let him come anymore. Now, I don't know if the church ever found out or not.
So it wasn't the church that banned him. It
Well,
wasn't the church that banned him.
Eventually they caught on, because what they intended was the professional wrestler would beat the local guys. But Grandpa wouldn't have anything of it. And my Uncle John Widrick, too, was a powerful man. I missed out on it, totally, as you can see. One other thing. My dad said to me after Grandpa had died, I love my grandpa, great guy. But I was too young to know the stories. Like, he died when I was 7 or 8 years old. But Grandpa was progressive, if that's the correct word. Or he had a farm on this road. That's where he started. And the church at that time was at Krogan. And no one was supposed to live across the river, because that's where the Englishmen were. And the Englishmen meant those that weren't Mennonites. And it was pretty, what would I say? What's the word I want to use? Pretty tight community, the Mennonites were early on. I don't know if they meant to be that way, but that's what it was. But my grandpa got sick of farming on this road here because it's full of rocks, hard. So he was the first guy to move across the river. He bought a farm on number 3 road. And I don't think he wasn't excommunicated, but he was taken to the task because he wasn't supposed to farm it over there. But shortly after he left over there, they started to come. So my grandpa was, I'm not sure his progressiveness was accepted all that well, but it didn't bother him. I wanted to share too about my dad, one thing about my dad. In our home, if we had hired men, if the hired men were single, they lived in a home with us. They got their lodging and their meals. If they were married, he had a tenant house and they lived there. So in our home, as early as I could remember, probably 4 or 5 years of age, and I'm sure Dad didn't start it then. After breakfast, if you ate breakfast there, you had to attend family devotions. And what my dad did, he read one chapter out of the Bible every morning. He'd go through the whole Bible and start over in Genesis. And then he would have prayer. He didn't explain what he read, he just read it. And then he would pray, and that would be it. And I didn't like that. I wanted to be out playing, sit here and listen to the Bible and pray. But I figured it out once, years later. I got thinking about that. I grew up with a King James Bible, it's a fine Bible, but I've since then gone to more I like the New Living Translation for one. There was some other ones. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but some of them I could understand better. But often, at times, those verses from the King James would come back, and I'm thinking, and then the Lord finally showed me, it's what you heard your dad read. And as near as I could figure out, I was in that home until I was 24 when we got married. Near as I can figure out, figuring probably 330 out of the year, counting times you might be sick or something. I heard the Bible read to me through 6 times. Sounds unusual, but I figured out the number of chapters and the days. I think I used 330 times whatever years from 4 to 24, 20 years. You can do the math later, but so that's. I thank my dad for that, even though I didn't like it. It's really helped me. Yeah. And my dad he had a couple short sayings. I'll quickly share them. I shared them before. Just one-liners. Keep your own porch clean. I said, Dad, what do you mean? He said, if you get too concerned about your neighbor being messy or not keeping up with things, you'll get so much junk on your own porch, you'll never see your neighbor. In other words, you won't be able to do anything for him. You understand what I'm saying? Become critical?
Yep.
Someone else?
Yep.
Tend your own misses. Mom used to say, tend your own wash. Saying. Another one, if anything's worth doing, doing it well. And if it's not worth doing, don't bother. You'll be busy enough doing the things that count. Don't waste time, you know. My dad was extremely, I thought as a young kid, fussy because he required cleanup. And we had toys, but you never left a toy outdoors overnight. You put things away. And I thought Dad was being kind of too fussy. So we're riding one day in the truck. I'm probably 7, 8 years old. We go by a place that's a total mess, stuff all over. And I said to Dad, what happened there? He looked at me and said, it didn't happen overnight. Now at the point, at that time, it didn't register. I didn't know what he meant. But you know yourself, if you leave things around and continue, eventually the job looks too big to clean up. So that's just a few. I don't know. Is there another funny one I had? That's probably most of it, except. Should I tell them about my heart surgeon?
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
I had open heart surgery and it was in 2005. I'd had several heart attacks before. I had stents put in, but I continued to have heart attacks. So they finally said open heart surgery. So I went to the hospital in June, I think, in Syracuse, St. Joe's. Went in on a Wednesday, and they scheduled me for the following Monday. And so I was there, you know, all hooked up with stuff to keep track of me and getting meds and getting my blood thick enough to operate. You don't want thin blood when you're going to have open heart surgery. So on a Friday night, about 5 o'clock, I didn't know until he came in, but the surgeon that was going to operate came in. You're still in his scrubs, soaking wet. Scrubs are just full of sweat, even his pants. I said to him, you look like you've been working. He looked at me and he said, I did 3 open heart surgeries today. Back in that time, they were a little more, how would I say, they've advanced a lot, you know, and they have assistants now that do a lot more, help them. Then he apologized to me. He said, I just haven't had time to talk with you, but he said, I want to talk with you. He said to me, I have a brother, and if I was going to operate on my brother, I would guarantee you I'd do the best job I could. And he said, I'll tell you, I'll guarantee you, I'll do as good for you as I do for him. But he said the final result is still in the hands of the Lord. I like doctors like that. Yeah, so, did you want her to share?
You haven't said anything about John.
Yeah,
John's family.
yeah. Yeah, John, I'm trying to think, grew up on, he talked a lot about sugar bush, and that the sugar bush, I think it was 5 generations that had been in that woods. And he was also mentioning when I think it was when his grandfather had the woods. they would, they then started moving up, and then they would stay up there, cook their meals up there, and he was saying that there were two bachelor guys, and they would cook the meals, and John said that he stayed up a few times, and he says, he says, they were good cooks, and so, yeah, that one worked all right for him. And then I was asking about like evaporator, and he said his grandpa Jake, which would have been, what was he? He was back 1800s, wasn't he? He had an evaporator, which I was surprised that they went back that far. Yeah, Uncle Jake. Well, it would have been. Yeah, it would have been back in the 1800s, and I think my grandfather had an evaporator too, but then he also talked about the flat pan, and I didn't realize they actually had an arch type of thing under it, and what would they do? Then you took they. I think it must have been a fine process to make sure you didn't burn what was in that. I guess they would take the fire out, much like you do at the end of sugaring. When you're boiling off, you would take the fire out of the arch when it got close.
Okay, we had a sugar bush too. Of course, those are a little more modern, because Dad started in
Probably 40s,
earlier than that.
30s.
Yeah, 30s during the Depression.
Okay.
And our evaporator was 6 by 15. It had a back pan which had flues. They dip down into almost into the ashes, and that's where the main boiling was done. But it would circulate it would come in sap and start through those flues, and then come in on one side of the head, the main pan in front, which were in panels with. So it would circulate and so when it got into the final where you were drawing off syrup, that's where the syrup would be formed in that pan, and you'd draw it off, and that kept circulating. And as far as the fire, we never took the fire out. What Dad would do, and I boiled some too, you kept track of your sap supply, and as it got maybe down like that, you started tapering off, because you didn't want to run out of sap with fire in the pan. You had to burn the pan out.
Right.
That's but earlier than that, it may have been different, because we never had a flat pan by itself. They used to have those.
Yeah.
They'd have been tough ones. I imagine they had to take the fire out of those.
I would think.
I would think there's no other way.
I remember my grandfather at one point, that was back when syrup was always done in barrels in bulk, and I guess the price wasn't as good that year, and so he took it back home, and Dad said put it on the flat pan and boiled it down to sugar.
Sugar, yeah.
Which would be a fine line.
Yeah.
But
It'd be tough too to keep it.
Yeah, you want
like
to
sugar cakes.
Yeah,
in bulk, right?
And of course, they would have used that for cooking, and and I guess with John on their farm, I think he was the third generation on that farm, and he's just down the road, not that far from here.
2, 3, probably the fourth place down.
Yeah. And I think with his great-grandfather, I think he said they might have built maybe about 20. And I think with his father, they were up to more like 30, 40, and then he would have been milking between 50, 60.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was,
family
yeah.
farm.
Yep.
And, yeah.
That was a good sized farm back then.
Yes, it was.
Not anymore.
There isn't many family farms left.
No, there isn't. No.
I'm a good friend of Dave Peck's. I don't know if people know
I
him.
know him.
He's got over 5,000 milkers.
Is that what they've got now on the Marks farms?
Over 5,000.
Can you imagine? Wow.
Total head
More
number.
power to him.
Yeah.
Makes me
He does a
tired
good
just to
job.
think.
He does a good job. He's a good
You
man.
would be going round
Yeah.
the clock with it.
Well, yeah, of course, they've got a lot of employees.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. He was a
Well,
veteran of Vietnam.
Llewellyn's dentist worked there for years, didn't he? Dennis.
Llewellyn's.
Llewellyn's dentist, wasn't he the mechanic there?
I don't know. It could be.
You would have a
He came to
constant job,
Loudville
too.
with them, I think.
Okay, and then we're gonna look at the Widrick
Well,
family
yeah,
that lived on
Same as this morning.
Wagner Road.
Yeah. Joseph Widrick Sr. was the seventh child of John Widrick and Anna Nafziger family. John Widrick was born in 1834 and died in 1906. Grandpa was born into a family of 11 children. The family homestead was the Joseph and Helena Nafziger farm, which was Ernie Steery's down the road, on the Kirshnerville Road. And Joseph Steery was the great-grandson of Peter Widrick, which I didn't know. I was surprised when I read that. Joseph Widrick Sr. was married to Catherine Yowzy, who were my grandparents. After their marriage, they farmed on the Wagner Road, and they raised a family of 10 children, and my mother was the sixth child, born July 13th, 1907. In 1912, Grandma and Grandpa built a new home on the farm, and they built it to accommodate for a church when they had church in the houses. Most of the families in that day took turns having church, like the Amish do today, I guess. And Mom always said that they slept in the road one night when they were building the house. They pulled the old house off and slept in the road, and Edsel told me that they put lights on it so that if a horse and buggy came, they knew there was something in the road. So, yeah, so anyway, and Grandpa, she said, worked away in the winter to support the family, and while he was away, the men had the chores in the barn. The boys, they had to take the cows out somewhere to drink water. Girls had their chores, and Mom said they had to mop the kitchen floor every day. Grandma was very fussy. She said that cleanliness was next to godliness, so she kept the house in good condition. Their education was up to the 8th grade if they passed a test, like regents today. If they didn't, they had to go a little longer, but Mom and them would have liked to have went to school longer. Mom would have liked to have been a teacher, and Catherine would have liked to have been a teacher. I don't know about Aunt Mabel.
I never heard her say it.
You never heard her
happy with what she had.
Yeah. So anyway, and when Grandma and Grandpa retired, then they built a piece onto the farmhouse yet, and then Grandma and Grandpa lived in part of that, and the big living room was split in two, and Grandma and Grandpa's part was heated by the furnace from Uncle Irvin's part, and then the rest of it, well, Grandma had a cook stove, and that was it, so. But anyway, I told them this morning how they had this new invention of kerosene burners added to a wood stove, like our gas stoves today. And I remember going there and everybody, they'd pick up the griddles and they'd look in and it was just so wonderful. And if you sat on the top of it, you wouldn't have even burned yourself. I don't think that went over very good, I know Norby's grandma Fanny did that too, so that must have been some new invention, But. So anyway, and Grandpa, well, we always butchered with Uncle Irvin's. Grandpa usually butchered till he couldn't, and Uncle Irvin did, and we used to butcher together. And then one thing I forgot too is I remember one time when Grandpa came, and Uncle Irvin's Edsel was born, and he stopped in and he said, "Well, Irvin's got a new baby," and Mom said, "Well, what did they name him?" He says, "Oh, that's easy. Just think of Axel. Axel." And his name was Edsel. Because we used to laugh at that. It was hard for Grandpa to pick up these new names, But anyway, they never had magazines, but Mom said that Grandpa, after work, he'd sit his Bible on the table with the kerosene lantern. He always read every night before he went to bed. The only magazine they had was the Herald of Warhite. That was in German. I can remember seeing that at Grandma's. I couldn't read it, but, so, yeah, so anyway.
I remember John was saying, and I think there's other men that have a history of this. He was mentioning that his grandpa Jake, as a young guy, worked on the log jams on the
Probably.
rivers.
Yes.
But that was
pulling
that
the
would have been
logs
at
down.
Belfort, wouldn't it? It still wasn't far.
Yeah. And also, another thing he was mentioning, and you mentioned too, wasn't it your grandpa, you said that used to go in the woods in
My dad worked in the woods a lot.
okay, in the winter time.
Yeah.
And a lot of the men would do that. You know,
Well,
it was
it
a
was for-
downtime.
B.T. Baslin in Croghan,
Yeah.
he was a wealthy man. Yeah,
Yeah, and he had a lot of the
Yeah.
logging around.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I know my grandfather was saying too that he worked
Yeah.
with Mr. Baslett with floating the logs.
That was dangerous work too, breaking up logs. People got killed doing that.
Boy, I
'Cause they had
guess
to walk on the wet logs.
they had spikes, right?
It's
They had
spikes.
spikes on them.
But they still.
They
some
were
of
pretty
them-
good at it too.
They were, but once in a while one would fall in.
I know. Boy, if you would have a jam. Oh my God.
Once that broke, you better head for shore too.
Yeah.
Once they broke, they had to know when it
And
was
hope they weren't jammed up too much where you
Yeah.
were going.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, I should know your name. I've forgotten it again. You're
Janet.
Pauline?
Pauline.
Oh,
Your dad. What was your dad's name?
Clarence.
Clarence. Clarence taught my Sunday school class when I was in youth. And at 21, I bought into the farm as a partner with my dad and brother. So now I'm income taxes going up.
Okay.
So he was. We were taught to tithe. So I love your dad for this. I asked him. I said, to me, now I owe this debt, pay off the farm. If I tithe, I'm giving money that should go to pay the debt. He grinned and said to me, he said, Loren, as long as you keep thinking that way, you'll never be out of debt. Never forgot that. And I complained to my dad when I started playing, not about that, but when I first started, I said, Dad, you know, this income tax stuff is crazy because people waste your money. He said, Loren, that's not your business. Thank God that you can pay it. No pity. Good teaching.
Yeah.
Good people. The other thing about my dad, didn't only just read the Bible, not a perfect man, but the example, mom and dad just was
They were
special.
wise men.
What?
They were wise men.
Yeah, they applied the Bible as best they understood.
We
it.
really don't appreciate what we had, do we?
You're
That's
right.
right. Good parents, especially now when you work with people who's, you know, did that quite a lot, and you know,
I think
as
back in
pastoring.
those men, Clarence's age, you know,
Yeah.
that the generation.
I
Yeah.
hope, Janet, you don't mind, but I'm going to talk about your father. All the while that your father had the John Deere business, and I don't know if you know it or not, but he carried the Testament in his pocket all the time.
My dad did.
Yes, your dad did.
I'm not
If the
surprised.
opportunity came, he was prepared.
Yep.
You know, I learned honesty from my dad, and I'll tell you how I learned it. We went to Florida one year, and we went down in Key West, and Dad picked up, I think they were 3-cent postcards, or cent postcards maybe, 1 cent postcard.
Probably 1 cent.
He picked it up, put it in his shirt pocket, and walked out of the store and forgot to pay. Well, we were halfway up the mainland, you know how far that is from Key West, before my dad put his hand up on his heart, and he said, Anna, I got that postcard in my pocket and I never paid for it. He says, I'll have to go back. And Mom said, well, you can't go back. We're halfway up the mainland. That was a long way away. My poor dad, I don't think he ever forgot that. He just stewed about that all the way home, that he picked up that postcard, didn't pay for it.
Isn't
A
that
penny.
something?
But I
That's
tell you, it
something.
taught me a
Yeah.
lesson, you know.
My dad
Those
taught.
men were honest.
Yes, they were. My dad taught me a lesson. We were taught not to steal. Just
Yeah.
he didn't even consider it. But I'm about 16 or 17. I'm in high school now. It really shocked me. He said, Loren, if you ever decide to steal, I'm thinking, where's this going? I've been told not to steal. Is Dad going nuts? He said, steal something really big. Because he said the size of what you steal is what you think your reputation's worth. You buy a pencil and you lost your he didn't mean to do that. But
No,
pick up a
yeah.
pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My reputation's not worth anything if I sell it for a pencil.
Yeah, is it worth it? Yeah.
It isn't. No. But anyways. Yeah, I agree with you. We didn't appreciate our parents enough.
No.
And the older people around
Like
me.
I said, I used to tell my mother she was a slave driver because she always had work for us to do. But we had time for other things too, but, to me, it seemed like I had to work all the time. If I wasn't helping in the house, then I had to go out and drive horses on the hay loader
Sure.
or something,
Quick story about lying. Yeah, for
But
me.
you know what? It was good for us. Kept us
Was.
out of trouble.
About lying.
And you know what? At night we were ready to go to bed. And
You
let me tell
bet.
you, we slept.
That's what my dad told
We
me.
weren't ready to get up in the morning, but we had to anyway.
He said, whatever you do for a job, get one that you really like. You won't have to waste money on entertainment.
I
But
didn't really like it, Loren.
story about lying. This is back just before I had my heart surgery. I was over in Nepal. We had a couple from our church that were missionaries over. They went to visit them. And my hip was bothering me. And his father had had hip surgery, and he had to walk over there, and I was just really in tough shape. His name is Fred Langworthy. He said, Loren, make me a promise. When you go home, have that hip replaced. He said, don't let it get any worse. So I came home early June with that in mind. So I'm scheduling hip surgery. Dr. Vanderwall is my doctor, my family doctor, and he's going to our church too at the time. So I got cleared. I also had heart problems at that time, but I was having stents and all that, so I thought everything was okay. So I got cleared by everybody. My heart doctor, the doctors at the hospital, they said, we have one final form. You have to get cleared by your family doctor. So I had an appointment with him on a Monday. On a Friday, we had a counseling session with a nurse. And just before she came, I had a little heart pain, so I knew what it was. But I said, I'm not going to tell Lynn, not going to tell her. Being a nurse, she would, nothing against her, but that would have taken the focus off in our counseling. So I didn't say anything. And we got through the counseling, the pain went away. So Monday morning, I headed for the hospital. And I'm thinking, am I going to tell Dr. Vanderwall that I've had a heart episode just a few days ago? And I thought, no, because it's gone. So, but on the way up, God said to me, he said, do you want to lie to your doctor? I said, I'm not lying. He said, if you withhold information that he needs, you withhold it, it's like lying. He said, secondly, he's your parishioner. What kind of an example is that? So I go up there, sit in, and he checks me all out. And I hadn't said anything yet because I was just waiting. He turns around and gets ready to sign the paper. He turns and looks at me. You got anything more you need to share? I was going to tell him anyways. So I shared with him. And then he said,
Intuition to him.
yeah, he said to me, he said, Loren, if we'd have gone through with heart surgery and you'd have died, we could be sued.
Yeah.
So, but the lesson, when you don't tell the truth, you need to tell someone. You hold it from them. God called that lying. It's a new angle, or not a new, but a new depth of that. So anyways, thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you folks for putting up with me.
Does anyone have questions?
Questions, yeah.
Is your son Kyle?
He's my son, yes.
Okay, I've met him.
You met him, yeah. Yeah, he's pastoring the church now.
Okay.
I retired, 10 years ago. There's something about retiring. They say pastors can't retire. You don't lose your caring. But there's a time for pastors to retire and let the next generation, because God's prepared them for this time. What he's facing now, I never faced.
Oh, I believe that.
Yeah, and he's prepared. I wasn't for that. Now, God prepared me for what we faced, but what he has to face now, So,
Big decisions.
yeah, and it's a whole different kind of stuff. That's the thing. There's always decisions, but this, boy, if you'd have asked me when I started pastoring if what's going on now would happen, I'd said no way. No way.
I don't think our generation is prepared for it anyway, do you?
Well, some of them
Actually.
aren't because of poor parenting.
Yeah,
For
but I
one thing.
mean, really,
And our school system is, I don't know if any of you listened to the song down here by Friends of,
No, I didn't hear.
and they sing a song about shootings in school.
Oh my.
And people say, why didn't God stop it? The reason God didn't stop it is he got kicked out of school some years ago, and he doesn't cause these things. But when we reject him, he withdraws his protection from us to try to reach us. Because I take that for granted.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm talking too much.
Yeah, we do tend to think that he's a puppet and we can
Yeah,
pull
we can.
strings.
Yes, and it's the other way around, somewhat. Yep.
Yeah. I was wondering if you would ask a blessing.
Father, we thank you for your goodness to us. I'm reminded, Lord, of a lady that came to know you at midlife, died soon afterwards, but she used to say to us in church, you folks don't have a clue how much God loves you, because she'd had a really bad life. And, she just, Jesus said once, those who've been forgiven much love much. Lord, help us to love more, you. We thank you, Father, for your goodness. We thank you for this place, privilege of being here today and sharing. God, would you keep us faithful till you call us home? Keep us on track. Lord, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. Lord, we have sin nature in us and it's not all gone. So protect us, Lord. Keep us safe. So that, Lord, we can spend eternity with you and the family of God. In Jesus' name, amen.
I did not realize that your grandfather was the first one that went over, well, they called it over the river.
Yeah, that's what my
I
dad
thought it was
said.
Chris Nasher, see?
I think I talked with someone today.
No, I believe you,
I think
but,
Chris was soon.
Yeah,
yeah,
and she
but,
said,
but like he said, his father, they didn't want to do that, and his father did, and then Chris Nasher went over, and he was the bishop.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that why it was okay then?
Well,
I mean,
I'm sure that made a difference.
yeah.
I think the concern that at least was voiced to me was the concern that with the distance factor would make it hard for the church to be there
Oh,
for
I
their
see.
needs, and would also be difficult, especially in winter time, for them to be a
Yeah.
part of the big group.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be another thing to
Speaking about
mention.
that, see,
Yeah.
Mom said, and I don't know if Aunt Mabel and Uncle Joe maybe never said, but with the size family that that Mom was in, when they went away, each one had to take a turn. They couldn't all go together. And Mom
Space,
used to
yeah.
tell us that. Probably when Aunt Laura came along, that didn't happen, Yeah, because see, all the rest of these were on their own, yeah.
She had nieces that were practically her age.
Yeah.
Okay, because she was.
She's the youngest girl.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
Aunt Laura and then just Irwin and Nelson, the three.
I remember Irving living next door
Yeah.
and saying, with Nelson being the youngest, that he would say when Ann, his older sister, he would say, I like when that lady comes and she brings her boys, because he got to play with them.
Yeah, because,
And
because,
then it was that Irving said they finally realized that he
Ezra.
had no idea that Ann was his older
yeah.
sister.
and Aunt
know,
Rosie's
she was on a
Ezra was the
household.
same age as Uncle Nelson.
Okay,
So Uncle Nelson was an uncle
right.
when he was just a little tot.
Yeah, about the same age as the nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easy to,
But my grandfather Lyndaker had the first car in church, and that was a bad thing too.
I suppose it was.
But then they accepted it because my grandfather never drove. Aunt Mariana was his chauffeur, so it was okay.
I can remember my grandpa Widrick, the one that lived with us. He finally bought a car late in life, and we lived at Lowville. We lived 3 miles out of Lowville, headed south towards Martinsburg, and we'd just be on just before you go up the Martinsburg Hill. And of course, he had no training with driving.
No,
None.
Grandpa Woodard didn't either. I rode with him.
So
I remember.
So what he would do when he came up from Lowville and wanted to pull in our driveway. It didn't matter if cars were coming or anything. He just pulled over. But the people knew his car, so
Yeah, so they would stop.
so they'd slow down. Yeah.
Well, see, the later years, Grandpa had in his head to keep it going burying, and Grandma didn't want to go anymore. And I don't know if you've ever heard of shadberries. They're sort of like a blueberry. Anyway, I got conned into going with him. And yeah, he wasn't a professional driver.
But you were young.
Well, I was probably only 9, 10, 11 when I went with him because Grandma didn't want him to go alone. And of course, my folks had a farm. They didn't have time to go, so I got conned on going with the grandpa. And I don't think I ever went with him again.
It even scared you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he'd go up the Limbakill Hill on the wrong side of the road. I mean, you wouldn't do that today.
Yeah.
It's like you said with your grandpa, I think. He just thought, well, I can do what I want,
And he never,
whenever I
It's
want.
the road at two.
Grandpa never got in an accident either. Never did.
No, Grandpa didn't either.
It was credit to the other people that drove.
Yes,
It's
yes.
called. I drove school bus for years.
He's
and
probably
they-
used to dodgeball.
Yeah, they told me the thing about driving school buses
Oh,
is
dear.
defensive driving. You got to
Oh,
drive for
yeah.
yourself and others. It was a good experience for me. I probably don't obey it as well as I should anymore. Oh
Even
well.
driving a school bus is different now than it was years ago, wasn't it?
Oh, I'm sure it is. Yeah. That's what I hear from current drivers. The students are pretty unmanageable.
If you didn't behave, you got kicked off the bus. I mean, I never did. I'm not talking from experience.
I remember once I stopped the bus.
Oh, you did?
We were probably just starting out. There's a ruckus going on. I stopped the bus. And they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're not moving until things straighten out.
Settled down.
You won't go home." Back then, you're probably getting in trouble doing that now with the authorities.
probably.
You can't
But,
do anything
yeah,
now.
but
I
back-
wouldn't
back
mind
then-
driving a school bus in the morning because I think all the children are half asleep yet, but then at night they're really wide awake.
I
At
used to
least that was my experience when I went to school.
I spent a whole winter driving the Tug Hill Run because the driver was sick. So what you did there, you started out and started picking up people halfway up, and you ended up picking up people in Barnes Corners.
Oh, yeah.
Then you had
Sears
pretty much
Pond.
Yeah, that area too.
Yeah, back
And then you
roads.
spent a half hour getting back to Lowville, which is
Yeah.
quite a while for kids. But I learned there were a couple of families up there, good parents. Wherever those kids sat, it was quiet.
Uh-huh.
You could tell by looking back what good parenting does. Yep.
One of my best girlfriends was from Sears Pond.
Yeah. I used to fish up there.
Did you?
Yeah, I used to go up there with.
To the reservoir?
Well, there's a pond. I don't know what it is. Yeah, it used to be called Sears
Probably
Pond.
Sears Pond.
Yeah. Harley Lee and I used to go there.
Oh, did you?
Yep. Harley was a good friend of mine.
Pauline and Janet.
Played